Welcome to the Wally Gimber, the 63rd edition, one of the oldest running races in the UK. 144 kilometres, 2,000 metres of climbing, and I don't think I've ever done this one before. So unlike the Puffs, where I knew everything about the race, having never done this one before, it's a bit of an unknown, which means I feel a little bit more nervous than normal, and that's quite a weird feeling because I'm not here to try and win. I just want to see what it's like, experience something new, see how well I can do ultimately, but it's a really weird mix of emotions. Half an hour until the race starts, or 35 minutes proper. We have a 5-minute neutralised. It's cold, it was 7 degrees on the way over, and it feels 7 degrees. It was nicer when the sun was out. My goal is to hide. I need to do this race to know that I can race 140 to 180 kilometres, because I may have been convinced to do another race which is 180 kilometres and it's hilly, so that's why I'm here basically. I need to try and ride conservatively, I need to try and use my energies wisely, and I need to get the full race distance. I don't need to animate the race, I don't need to be involved in the race in the way that every part of me wants to be, or every part of me feels like I need to be. My predictions are, it's going to be hard. It's described as an attritional race. I'd be really pleased if I finished in the top 20. I think we were discussing on the way over. There are so many young up-and-coming riders that are really good, and there are some very experienced riders here as well, which are racing well, like Alex Richardson that won the Jock Wadley last week. So, top 20 I think is realistic. I think it's still on the upper end of what's possible. We'll see. Let's find out. Everyone does it, and I don't know what the solution is.
There were also cars getting in between the group.
I'm surprised the circuit was allowed to be used.
Yeah. And maybe like 10, 15 years ago on this circuit, it's a fairly quiet road and you wouldn't get that.
Yeah. So the roads are definitely busier, aren't they?
The roads are busier. Do stuff like this. I don't know what the future is called. Road racing in the UK. Me and my brother were talking about it on the way home yesterday, saying, is it like, in Holland you see these bigger versions of things like that, cyclo cars, and maybe that's the way it's going to be.
At this stage in the race, I'd probably bring you loads of clips from the race, things that happened, a brief race report, and then a post-race debrief. But as you've probably seen in the title already, or read about online this week, the race was cancelled after less than 2 laps, so that's under 40 kilometres. I think ultimately there were many reasons why the race was cancelled, but it was one incident that led directly to the decision to cancel the race, and that's partly because the air ambulance had to land, from my understanding, to take an injured rider away to hospital, where he had to have surgery later that day on a laceration to his neck. From my understanding, again, he is recovering okay, he is going to be fine, but that sort of incident where a rider goes through the rear windscreen of a vehicle, suffers lacerations to their neck, it doesn't take a lot for that to go seriously wrong. Just a few centimetres other way and we could be talking about a very different series of events. And that makes me angry, it makes me a little bit disappointed, frustrated. And again, there are lots of reasons for this. I think I'm going to sit here and waffle now for a little while. Everything about that race felt wrong. And it's easy to say that in hindsight, but we were called to the riders' briefing before the race. That eventually happens late because of the reluctance of the riders to gather inside the hall to listen to the commissaires. The commissaires hadn't finished speaking, and they provide important information as to the environment that we're about to go into, the traffic situations, the rules and regulations of the event. This always happens. It's a standard thing at the start of a race. The riders were reluctant to listen, as I said. Many riders even attempted to leave the hall before the briefing had finished. Crucial information is provided in these, and it's really important to listen because sometimes that information could potentially save your life. You may well be aware that here in the UK we race on open roads. This has always been the case. You're advised to stay on the left-hand side of the road, and actually in some situations you have to follow the rule of the road. So if there is a solid white line, think of it as a wall. You must not cross that solid white line. You have oncoming live traffic on the other lane, on the other carriageway, so you really need to adhere to that rule. It's such a frequent thing that riders are disqualified, or at least they're told that they shouldn't be crossing that line when they've been spotted crossing that line. On Sunday, there was so much of that happening, and because of the direction of the wind, we were doing about 35 to 40 miles an hour, so what's that, 54, 55 kilometres an hour, up to 64 kilometres an hour, with the tailwind on the slight downhill, and then the traffic's coming towards you in a national speed limit, so maybe they've slowed to 50. That's a fast impact if something was to go wrong, someone was to swerve out onto the other side of the road. Now, personally, throughout much of my career, when cycling was my career, I avoided races like this. I preferred racing at the higher level, avoiding the national B level races, as we refer to them here in the UK, because of this very reason. I just don't particularly think they're safe. But now, I really want to race. I want to try and enjoy those experiences, and I've decided that the only way to do that is just to sort of suck it up, I suppose, and go to these events. So going back to the start of the race, we came out and everything was normal. Actually, the neutraliser was normal. You ride up through the finish, it's a slight gradient up there, onto the first stretch of carriageway, first stretch of road, and it's fast, it's nervous like the start of a bike race, but actually it didn't feel particularly dangerous. It wasn't until we turned off that first road onto a smaller road heading towards a railway station and the feed zone, which was on the fastest part of the circuit from what I could tell. That's when it started to feel a little bit more chaotic. That's when the tailwind really whipped up and really helped us along, and that's when the oncoming traffic was going faster. You then come off this road and you end up in a village. In this village, there are parked cars on both sides of the road. There is live traffic in the carriageway trying to go in both directions as well, and this is where all the chaos began. Normally, you'd have an older rider, a team of riders maybe, sit at the front and say, look, just take it easy through here. You're not going to win the bike race in the first 15 kilometres. There's no need to go absolutely mad through here. But because of the deterioration of the level of racing in the UK, and I think level is the wrong word, I think the deterioration of the hierarchy of racing in the UK, we don't have that anymore. There is no 4, 5, 6 continental teams, registered UCR teams, which are riders that are able to achieve results internationally. That's completely gone. Now those riders, some of them have stopped racing, some of them are absorbed by the elite level teams and the lower club level teams, or the sponsored level teams, shop registered teams. But what it means is there is no big voice of riders to say, look, hang on, calm down here. And it does take that, I think, in certain scenarios where you have a team of riders that people look up to and they're able to sort of enforce a road captain type role on the event. In that sort of situation, racing as a relative privateer now, I suppose. I was there with a teammate called Harry actually at the weekend. I dropped to the back, it's safe, you've got plenty of visibility of what's going on. Again, you're not going to win the bike race in the first 15 kilometres, although you very well could lose it, but you just observe in those opening kilometres. The race then goes through a few undulations. We drop into a second village, a similar situation, a little bit chaotic. People chopping and turning and just trying to find their position in the bunch, and that's all fine, apart from when you consider the speed of the oncoming traffic, and then it's a little bit unnecessary. Actually, what would have been beneficial at this stage would have been for a big team to be on the front. Getting to the second lap, and this frenzy of nerves has whipped up a little bit. I'm going to make a claim here. I don't believe that narrow handlebars really are a good thing whatsoever. I know I've put 38mm or 38 centimetre bars on my bike, but I think once you drop down towards 38 and 36, you lose the stability. Can you imagine climbing out of the saddle, grabbing your bars by the stem? You lose all of that lateral stability that wider bars offer. This is an issue because it creates this twitchiness and this lack of responsiveness within the bunch, and that really can be quite a problem. So I don't think these narrow bars are helping the situation whatsoever. People aren't quite as relaxed on the bike. They don't quite have the same stability as wider bars used to in the past. So the race is nervous, it's frantic, it's fast. The NEG, the National Escort Group on motorbikes, they do a fantastic job of setting off the traffic. On the whole, they are amazing at keeping a bike race safe and keeping a bike race functional, moving and operational. And I think if it wasn't for them, well no, certainly if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be racing at all. So this circuit, it's on a busy road, going through a village. On the second lap, somehow a vehicle ends up driving in the same direction as the group. They've pulled out of a side road after being told to stop. I'm not entirely sure. I can't speculate exactly on what happened. Someone manages to hit the back of the vehicle. Again, I'm not entirely sure how that happens. And I think at this stage, riders as a collective have to take a responsibility, because you can see there's a vehicle in the road. You don't need to hit it. Like, we're all paying attention to what we're doing. Maybe we're looking at the wheel in front, but you need to be looking at wheels 20 or 30 in front. And if you're on the open road, you need to be looking even further ahead than that, because ultimately the most important thing is that we all make it home at the end of the day. It's barely even 10 years ago that Junior Heffernan lost his life in the Severn Bridge road race, and we don't need to get close to repeating that. And unfortunately on Sunday we did. And this is what I believe now really needs to stop. And I think there are several options. I don't have the answers, but I would like to create a discussion around this, because I think it's really important that this is avoided in the future. We race through that village, someone's hit the back of a car. Less than 5 minutes later, we end up in the next village. And this is why I believe riders need to take responsibility. Someone at this stage is then driving in the same direction as the race. But instead of the riders going, hang on, this is absolutely mad, let's ease off, people are going up the left-hand side of the car, people are going around the right-hand side of the car. I was the last rider in the bunch to overtake the car, because at this stage, self-preservation becomes far more important than racing. When I overtook that car, as it was, he was a little bit angry, a little bit riled, he beeped the horn, who knows what he did further. The race continued, and within a few minutes, my heart wasn't in the race anymore. I spoke to one of the members of the NEG and I asked him what his true thoughts were. He didn't believe it was acceptable to continue, and within minutes the race had fortunately been stopped. We all stopped on the side of the road, there was a discussion. I went off to find Micah, who was using the camera at the time. Went back to the HQ to confirm that indeed, because of the landing of the air ambulance and the first aid responders being taken up with the incident, the race couldn't continue. But I don't believe that should have been the deciding factor. The race shouldn't have continued anyway because of rider behaviour, traffic conditions, and what was ultimately too much of an ambitious circuit. What I mean by that is it was a 20-kilometre circuit. 20 kilometres, that's a long way. There are a lot of junctions, there are lots of different environmental conditions on that circuit, whether that's potholes, whether that's traffic, whether that's villages, whether that's just access to different spots. So I think there are a few solutions going forward. I think rider behaviour is first and foremost the thing that needs to be addressed. And I don't think it needs to change massively. I just think there needs to be a continual awareness that racing is racing. It's not life. Life is much more important than racing. The fact that everybody makes it home unscathed at the end of the day. On open roads, at a National B level, which in perspective you have World Tour, then you have Pro Continental level, Continental level, then you have National Elite level, then you have National B. So we're talking quite far down the order of world cycling here. There is no do or die manoeuvre. Winning these races isn't going to change anything in anyone's career. It's great as a personal achievement, it's great for training, it's good fun if the races are good. But you have to remember that at the end of the day, people need to make it home. So rider behaviour, first and foremost. Always have that presence of awareness of what's going on around you, how your behaviour is affecting people. Number two, cycling should be a spectator sport. Ultimately, it's not, partly because it's an A to B sport at many levels, meaning it's actually quite hard for people to watch different stages throughout the race. But if we had 4 to 8 kilometre circuits, that halves the amount of road that's being used. Okay, sure, we'll have to do more laps. You could argue that's boring. But if you have a really good circuit, actually, that can really make a race rather than classifying it as boring because we're not on a variety of roads. Having an 8 kilometre circuit or a 4 kilometre circuit isn't much different to 20 kilometres. It just makes it easier to police, to have marshals in place, to have potential full road closure if possible. I think we need to avoid populated areas when we're racing as well, unless we're doing city centre circuits, which is the ultimate form of cycle sport, because you see someone come around every 60 to 90 seconds. That is the ultimate spectator sport, but for some reason that isn't thriving in the UK at the moment either. People don't like the roads closed, but many city centres are pedestrianised now, so you're not technically closing a road and people can still access the shops. Plus there's a spectacle, kids can get involved as well. Organisers, I think they have to just be a little bit more discerning. I think it's really unfair to accuse organisers of anything because they do a fantastic job, without which cycling wouldn't exist at all. Maybe if you wanted to place a little responsibility in everyone's corner, just double question, does the circuit really need to be that big? Do we really need this vast expanse of road? Could we make something out of a smaller circuit? And I think ultimately the answer probably is yes. Of course, that does depend on how many roads you have in your area. Yeah, the escort group, we just really actually need more riders, I think, on the road for the national escort group. You can't fault them. Many of them are bike riders, ex-police riders, ex-cyclists themselves, and I think they do a fantastic job. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding from the bike riders' side when it comes to the commissaires and the NEG. I think sometimes cyclists in the race can think that the NEG aren't on their side or the commissaires aren't on their side, but ultimately all they want is everyone to have a safe race and to make it home at the end of the day. So I think there's not a lot they could do. Maybe we should have a few more. Maybe there is a ratio. I don't actually know enough about this topic. All I know is that I want to create some sort of change and I'm not quite sure how yet. My main focus is rider education. I think if riders are educated that we all need to make it home safely at the end of a race and that we all have a responsibility to bear when it comes to the safety of others, this sort of incident won't ever happen again. I think British Cycling also needs to step in and do something because it's a governing body. They need to govern the sport and approach from all angles to make sure that something like this never happens again, because there's no need for it. Cycling is an amazing sport. Cycling is a beautiful sport. Teams come and go, events come and go. They have done throughout the last, how long has cycling existed now? Since the early 1900s. That's never going to change. But what can change is the future. And I think we all need to work together to create some sort of solution that ensures that we have this rich cycling heritage continue and that young riders can aspire to be top professionals, that they can work their way up through the levels, because that is really important. I think you learn to race at a lower level, you learn to win because everybody's watching the good riders at the lower level. When you get to a higher level, it's almost easier to win because there are too many riders to watch. You can't possibly watch every single person, and then you break down into the individual tactics of teams and the whole dynamic of racing changes. If you can learn to win at a lower level, you will learn to win pretty quickly at a higher level. And I think that's a really important takeaway from this, is racing at that level is incredibly important to the future of cycling in this country. But we need to find a way to make it sustainable, to make it safe, to make it enjoyable. And then finally, the public. Ultimately, we're all humans. I've saved this until the end because I think I have the least influence over this. There's nothing I can do to change this really, but just if humans were a little bit more compassionate for each other and had a little bit more patience and a little bit more understanding for what that one person is doing on that day and how that's affecting them or not affecting them ultimately. Waiting for a bike race to pass doesn't take long. You'll see in some of the clips the entire race is gone in under 60 seconds. I think we can all afford to give up 60 seconds. If we can't afford to give up 60 seconds, there's something clearly life-threateningly serious happening at the time, and therefore it's an exclusion. But that wasn't the case on Sunday. We need to find a way together to work forwards. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. I'm sorry if this has gone on and on and on. I had a lot to say. I wasn't quite sure how to articulate it. I certainly couldn't have filmed this a week ago because at the time I was just quite angry, a little bit disappointed and frustrated. But I think there is a positive future to be had, and I think we can work out one that ensures everyone enjoys their cycling.